She ran away from him 5 years ago. Now she's 6 weeks from marrying someone else. But Roland Voss doesn't do coincidences. He would do anything to pull her back in. She is about to walk down that aisle carrying a secret that would destroy everything. Welcome to Tiana Love Stories. Happy weekend, everyone. Where are you watching from? Bruno had been sweet to Jenny at the drop-off. He always was. He kissed her at the departure entrance, with both hands on her face the way he did when he wanted her to slow down and actually look at him. And she had, for a moment, let herself just be there. His eyes were warm. They were always warm. Bruno had the kind of steadiness that other women pointed at from across dinner tables and told their partners to take notes. They were 6 weeks from their wedding, and 6 weeks from the venue they had spent 4 months arguing warmly about, the flowers she had finally approved on a Tuesday afternoon between 2 conference calls, the dress that was already altered and hanging in her mother's spare room because Bruno said it was bad luck to keep it at the apartment. 6 weeks from the day she would stand in front of everyone they loved and make it official. 7 days, he'd said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Come back to me in one piece. I always do, Jenny said. He smiled and picked up her carry-on and walked her to the entrance. And then, just before she went through the doors, he called after her. Enjoy the break too, Jen. You've been running for months. She turned and smiled. The doors slid open behind her. She didn't correct him. She never corrected him. Aunt Bruno knew about the acquisition. He just never quite understood the size of it, or the size of her. She had accepted this a long time ago. Jenny stood to the side of the boarding queue with her phone pressed to her ear, and her carry-on handle gripped in her left hand, the diamond on her finger catching the terminal light every time she shifted her weight. The clause in Section 4 needs to be airtight before I land, she said. I don't care what Daniels thinks about the timeline. If the seller gets wind that we're uncertain about the terms, they will use that, and I am not flying 11 hours to lose this deal in the first meeting. Her assistant said something reassuring. Jenny was already moving toward the gate, and she had been working on this acquisition for 4 months, and she intended to close it quickly without leaving anything on the table. On the plane, she pulled up the acquisition file and worked for 3 hours without stopping. When the cabin lights dimmed and the passenger beside her pulled a blanket over his shoulders and tipped his seat back, Jenny adjusted her screen brightness and kept going. She was not on a break. She had never been on a break. Valencia in the early evening was warm. Jenny stepped out of the terminal and stood on the pavement for a while. Then she got in the car she had pre-booked and checked her emails on the way to the hotel. Marisol and Diane were already in the lobby when she arrived, Marisol in a sundress with a drink in her hand that was clearly not her first, Diane laughing at something on her phone. They had been Jenny's closest friends since university, the kind of women who had watched her build her career from a cramped, shared apartment and a determination that occasionally frightened people. And they greeted her now with the particular warmth of people who knew not to ask if she'd relaxed on the flight. You worked the whole way, Marisol said. Not a question. I slept, Jenny said. You did not sleep. I rested my eyes between emails. Diane handed her a drink from the bar cart by the lobby sofa. You have 40 minutes to get changed. We are going out. Jenny looked at her watch, looked at her laptop bag. Fine, she said. 40 minutes. The club sat on the edge of the beach. Music moved through it at a volume. The crowd was the particular mix, people who belonged there and people performing, and very little space between the two. Jenny was on her second drink, standing with Marisol at the edge of the terrace where the wooden floor met the sand, laughing at something genuinely funny for the first time in longer than she could pinpoint, when it happened. Someone stepped into her space from the left, a server moving too quickly, a tray tilting, and Jenny turned instinctively, and her glass went sideways, and the contents landed cleanly and completely on the white shirt of the man standing directly behind her. She spun around with an apology already forming, and stopped. 5 years collapsed into 1 second. Roland Voss, her ex-boyfriend, stood in front of her with his white shirt soaked and his dark eyes on her face, and the specific, devastating stillness of a man who had not been surprised by anything in a very long time. Her apology died in her throat, her shoulders pulled back, her chin lifted exactly 1 degree, her grip on her empty glass tightened until the base of it pressed into her palm. Roland looked down at his shirt, then up at her face. His jaw didn't move, his expression didn't shift. He looked at her the way he had always looked at her, unhurried, complete, like she was the only fixed point in the room, and everything else was simply background. "Watch where you're going," he said. 4 words. Quiet. Delivered with the flat, unbothered precision of a man who had chosen each one deliberately. Her fingers found her clutch. She opened it, took out the only cash she had, a $5 bill, and placed it against the wet fabric of his chest with a hand that did not shake. "For the dry cleaning," she said pleasantly. She turned and walked away without looking back. Roland didn't move. The club continued around him. Music, laughter, the sea doing what the sea does. And Roland stood exactly where he was with a $5 bill pressed against his chest and his eyes on the space where she had been standing. He looked down at the note. His thumb moved across the edge of it once, then again. Slowly, he looked up. She was already gone, back into the amber light and the crowd, her friends closing around her like she had never left, her laugh reaching him once over the music before the night swallowed it whole. His hand closed around the bill, his jaw tightened once. Then he straightened his shirt, slid the note into his pocket, and looked at the place where the crowd had closed behind her for a long time. She had practiced for this moment. I told herself that if she ever saw him again, she would be ready. What she hadn't practiced was how it would feel when he looked at her, like those past years meant absolutely nothing. And she realized, with her back straight and her chin up and her hands perfectly steady, that he had learned that look directly from her. Jenny stood at the mirror in her hotel room and put her armor on one layer at a time, the specific expression of a woman who had already decided how the morning was going to go and was not available for alternative suggestions. She had already done the hardest thing. She had left. She had packed one bag in the dark and walked out of his apartment and changed her number before his plane touched down and built an entire life on the other side of that decision. Everything since then had been easy by comparison. She told herself this until it felt almost true. Then she picked up her folder and walked out. The acquisition meeting was on the 4th floor of a glass-fronted building 3 blocks from the waterfront. Jenny arrived, pushed open the door, and walked in. Roland was already seated. They were here for the same property. He was at the far end of the conference table with a glass of water he hadn't touched, and both hands loose in front of him. He looked up the moment she walked in, and for one unguarded second, something moved across his face, the pen in his right hand, going completely still. Then his expression closed back to nothing, and he looked down at his documents. Jenny took her seat across the table. The meeting opened immediately. The seller, Senor Arteta, a compact and careful-eyed with a lawyer on each side, presented the property overview with the measured pace of a man who understood he had something valuable and was in no hurry to let it go cheaply. The other parties listened and nodded and asked the kinds of questions that confirmed they had prepared adequately. Roland and Jenny did not ask adequate questions. Roland's first question dismantled a valuation assumption so quietly and so precisely that the consultant from the Madrid group wrote something down without appearing to realize he was doing it. Jenny's response to the structural survey reframed the harbor access conversation in a way that made Arteta's left lawyer lean over and whisper to the right one. Roland spoke, and the room contracted around his words. He never raised his voice, never repeated himself. And every sentence arrived like something decided rather than suggested. Jenny waited until he finished each time, and then took the weakest point in his argument, apart with the clean efficiency of someone who had seen it coming from the 3rd word of his opening. His eyes came to her face each time she spoke. She beat him on 2 points. He didn't react the way other men did. No frustration moving through his jaw. No adjustment visible in his shoulders. Just a slight shift of his attention, the way a man notes the position of a piece on a board and continues playing. When Arteta called the break, the room began to move. Phones appeared. Chairs scraped. The Madrid group retreated to the corridor in urgent, quiet conversation. 3 of the male investors moved toward Jenny before she had finished closing her folder. One introduced himself with a card. Another asked about her firm's previous acquisitions in the region. The third laughed at something she said with the particular enthusiasm of a man who wanted her to know he found her impressive. Jenny received all of it with the easy warmth of a woman who had been doing this for years. She answered questions, accepted the card, smiled at the right moments. Across the room, Roland stood with his jacket open and his hands in his pockets, and his eyes on Jenny with an expression that gave away nothing. He did not move toward her. He did not look away. He waited. When the last investor shook Jenny's hand and moved toward the door, Roland crossed the room quickly. Jenny closed her folder and looked up. Roland's eyes dropped to her left hand. One clean downward glance. He looked at the ring the way a man looks at something he has already decided has nothing to do with him. His eyes came back up to her face. "I love your hair," he said. Quiet. Unbothered. Like he had the right to say it. Like 5 years was a corridor they had simply walked down together and arrived here at the other end. And this was just what came next. Jenny's jaw tightened, her folder pressed against her ribs. "Don't," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "You took compliments from every man in this room," he said. "Still can't take one from me." Her chin lifted, her mouth opened. He turned and walked away before she could answer, his jacket moving as he went, the door swinging behind him, and the room suddenly very quiet and very empty around her. So Jenny stood where she was with her folder against her chest, and the specific fury of a woman who had rehearsed every version of this conversation, except the one where he acted like time was a thing that happened to other people. She turned and walked the other direction. That evening she sat at the hotel window with Valencia going dark outside, and her acquisition notes spread across the bed beside her. She picked up her folder and kept working. By the end of day 2, Jenny knew the acquisition was stalling. Senor Arteta's responses had slowed. His lawyers were asking procedural questions that weren't procedural. Something was moving behind the scenes, and nobody was telling her what it was yet. She sat at her hotel desk at 11 that night, with the documents spread in front of her and her second coffee going cold beside her laptop, and worked the problem from every angle she could find. Her phone buzzed. "Bruno," she picked up. "Tell me you've been to the beach at least once," he said. "I will," she said. "Jen, how was your day?" he told her. She listened with one hand still on her pen, her eyes moving across the document in front of her, asking the right questions at the right moments. Bruno's day had been uncomplicated. A good meeting. Lunch with a colleague. He had found a new restaurant near their apartment he wanted to take her to when she got back. "Miss you," he said before he hung up. "Miss you too," she said. She put the phone down and picked up her pen and kept working. Roland applied pressure from angles she hadn't considered. She noticed this on day 2 and filed it without examining it too closely, because the implications of how prepared he was for this specific deal in this specific city sat in a place she wasn't ready to open yet. She matched him point for point and spent her evenings closing the gaps and told herself it was simply competition and nothing about it was personal. She almost believed it. The clause landed on day 3 like a door slamming shut. Senor Arteta's legal team sent it through at 10 in the morning. Jenny read it once, called her firm's senior lawyer. The answer came back the same way she already knew it would. Inheritance law. The property could only pass to an established partnership or married entity. Solo acquisition did not qualify. Or 18 months through the Spanish courts, minimum to challenge it. The seller would move on long before that. Jenny put the phone down. She stood at the window, with her hand flat on the glass, and the deal she had been building for 4 months in pieces behind her. Then she noticed something that made her go very still. Roland's legal team had already submitted a partnership contract, fully drafted, specific to this property, this clause, this situation. Nobody drafts something that comprehensive unless they know exactly what they are going to need it for. She stood at the window for a long time. She had narrowed her options to 2, neither of them good. When someone knocked on her hotel room door at 7 that evening, she opened it. She what? Roland stood in the corridor with his jacket on and his hands loose at his sides, and the expression of a man who had not considered the possibility that this might be inconvenient. Jenny's hand tightened on the doorframe. "How long have you known about the clause?" she said. "Long enough," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she stepped back and let him in. He walked in and stopped in the center of the room. He didn't sit. He didn't move toward the window or the desk. He just stood there, and the room felt smaller with him in it. "A partnership," he said. "Legal, documented, equal standing. We satisfy the clause together, close the deal, split the asset on terms we agree tonight." "Nothing about this is simple," she said. "Walking away is simple," he said. "I don't think you're going to do that." Jenny moved to the window. The distance between them became 8 feet, then 7. He hadn't moved, but she had, and the room kept contracting, and she kept being aware of it. She laid out her terms: equal standing, joint decision-making, independent arbitration on any default. No arrangement where he held operational control and she was just the name on the paperwork. He agreed to every single one without pushing back. That unsettled her, more than if he had argued. She turned to face him. He was closer than she had registered. She had moved toward the window and he hadn't followed, but somehow the distance between them had shrunk to 5 feet, and she hadn't noticed it happening. With Roland, she had always noticed everything. 5 years had done nothing about that. Neither of them stepped back. "You're agreeing to everything," she said. You haven't pushed back once. Your terms are reasonable. Nobody agrees to everything." "I'm not nobody," he said. The 5 feet between them had developed a quality that had nothing to do with the negotiation, and everything to do with the fact that her hands already knew the specific warmth of standing this close to him, and her hands had not forgotten a single thing her mind had spent years trying to overwrite. Her eyes stayed on his stayed on hers. She turned and walked to the desk and picked up her pen. "I'll have my lawyers review the structure tonight," she said. "You'll have my answer by morning." "You'll say yes tonight," he said. "You don't need until morning." Her pen moved across the page. Margin notes. Terms. The performance of a woman who was not thinking about the distance she had just put between herself and the man standing behind her. "Good night, Mr. Voss," she said. She heard him move, his footsteps across the room. The door opened. Then he stopped. "I don't regret a single day of those 2 years we spent together, Jenny," he said. "Not one." The door closed. Jenny stood where she was for a moment. Then she walked to the door and put her back against it and stood in the quiet with his words still in the air where he had left them. Her eyes closed, her hand pressed flat against the door behind her. She stayed there for a long time. Jenny came down to the lobby at 8:55, and Roland was already there. He was standing with his phone in his hand and his jacket on, and that particular stillness she had spent 2 years learning and 5 years trying to forget. He put his phone in his pocket when he saw her and said nothing for a moment. Just looked at her, the way he always looked at her, like he had been waiting and had not been uncertain that she would come. "Naomi reports directly to Arteta," he said. "Whatever she sees today is what he hears tonight." "I know how this works," Jenny said. "Then you know what today needs to look like." Jenny held his gaze. Her folder was under her left arm. Her ring caught the lobby light between them. "Don't make it complicated," she said. Roland looked at her for one moment. Then he held out his hand. She looked at it. Open, steady, and completely unbothered. The hand of a man making a practical suggestion and waiting for a practical response. She knew this hand. That was the problem. She knew the warmth of it. She put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers slowly and warmly, like they had done this 1,000 times before and had no particular reason to treat this time differently. Jenny kept her eyes forward and told herself this was a business decision. Bruno would never know. This was simply what closing a deal sometimes required. Roland's thumb moved once across her knuckles. Her jaw tightened. She said nothing. They walked out of the hotel together into the morning, but Naomi was waiting at the resort entrance. A tall woman in her 50s, with sharp eyes and the unhurried authority of someone who had watched many buyers come through this property and had formed strong opinions about all of them. She shook their hands, looked between them once with an assessment that lasted less than 3 seconds, and began the tour. Roland and Jenny followed, his hand still in hers. In the entrance hall, Naomi gestured at the original ceiling detail and turned to ask about their renovation intentions. Roland said, "We haven't decided yet," with the easy, natural authority of a man who had been saying, "we," in relation to this woman for years. And the word landed in Jenny's chest before she could stop it, warm and familiar and deeply unfair. "Why, we want to preserve as much of the original structure as possible," Jenny added, her voice completely level. She felt Roland's hand shift slightly in hers, a small adjustment, fingers resettling, the quiet gesture of a man who had just heard something that pleased him. "It's what drew us to the property initially." Naomi nodded and moved on. Roland leaned down, his mouth close to her ear. "Good," he said quietly. Jenny did not turn her head. Naomi led them through the east wing, and at one point stepped away to take a call. Roland and Jenny were alone in the middle of an unfinished room, with afternoon light coming through a gap in the covered windows, and the distant sound of Naomi's voice fading. They were still holding hands. She didn't let go. He didn't let go. "You said we," she said. "It's what we agreed to," he said. It sounded natural. "It always did," he said. She looked at him. He looked back. His eyes didn't move. They never moved. That had always been the thing about Roland. He looked at her like she was the only fixed point in any room. She had spent 2 years loving that, and 5 years understanding why it was the most dangerous thing she had ever let happen to her. "Don't," she said. "I didn't say anything. You were about to." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something quieter. Something that suggested she was still the most interesting thing in any room he had ever stood in, and he had no particular intention of pretending otherwise. Naomi's heels clicked back down the corridor toward them, and they both looked forward, and Jenny felt Roland's thumb move across her knuckles a second time and said nothing about it. The contract review that afternoon ran until 6. Roland and Jenny sat side by side the way the partnership required and Arteta's team expected. Jenny was mid-sentence when Bruno's name lit up her phone on the table beside her notes. She picked it up and stepped outside. The glass door closed behind her. Roland stopped talking. The sentence simply ended. Mid-thought. Mid-word. Like the power had been cut. His eyes went to the glass door and stayed there. The junior lawyer across the table waited for him to continue. Roland did not continue. He watched Jenny outside in the late afternoon light with the phone pressed to her ear, her free hand moving the way it always moved when she was explaining something she cared about, her head tilting at the angle it tilted when she was talking to someone she loved. She smiled at something Bruno said, then laughed. Roland knew that smile. He had spent 2 years being the reason for it. His hand on the table closed slowly into a fist. Then he flattened it back out. Deliberately. Like a man reminding himself where he was. The junior lawyer said his name. Roland didn't register it. He said it again. Nothing. The junior lawyer found something important to look at on his phone. Jenny came back inside, sat down, picked up her notes exactly where she had left them. Roland picked up his sentence exactly where he had left it. The review continued, and nobody said anything. By 7:30, they were the last two in the building. Jenny was closing her folders. Roland stood and picked up his jacket and looked at her in the way he had been looking at her all day. "You didn't hold my hand like someone who was pretending," he said. Jenny picked up her bag. "Good night, Roland," she said. She walked out. In the elevator, she pressed the button to her floor and stood with her bag strap in both hands, her eyes on the closing doors and the quiet knowledge of a woman who has spent a whole day pretending and has run completely out of convincing herself. She did not call Bruno that night. She told herself it was because it was late. She had left Roland without a word 5 years ago because she knew that if she heard his voice, she would stay. Nothing had changed. His voice was still the most dangerous thing she had ever let close to her. Lunch was on the harbor terrace, and nobody was watching them. That was the problem. For 4 days, there had always been someone watching. Naomi, Arteta's lawyers, the Madrid group, and the junior associates who pretended to look at their phones. There had always been a reason for the performance and a frame around the tension. Today, it was just a white tablecloth and the water very blue below them, and the Valencia sun doing what it always did at midday, and no audience, and no reason to hold hands, and no cover for whatever this actually was. Roland was looking at the harbor. "She called you devoted," Jenny said. "Naomi. I heard her on the phone with Arteta yesterday." Roland said nothing. He looked at the water with the expression of a man receiving information he had no intention of correcting. Jenny watched him sit with the word, without dismissing it or deflecting. Something moved through her chest before she could stop it, and a sound escaped her mouth that she had not planned. A laugh, short and quiet and completely involuntary. Roland turned from the water and looked at her, and the almost smile that had been threatening since the beach club finally arrived. Real this time, fuller, reaching somewhere in his face that she had not seen in 5 years. And his eyes didn't leave her face, and the laugh was already out there between them on the white tablecloth in the Valencia sun, and there was nothing to do about it now. "Don't," she said. "I'm always looking at you," he said. Jenny reached for her water glass, and a strand of hair came loose across her cheek at the same moment, and Roland's hand moved before anything else did. Came up, 2 fingers, the completely automatic gesture of a man doing exactly this without thinking, and stopped. His fingers hung in the air 2 inches from her face. Roland lowered his hand to the table. Slowly. His jaw tightened once. He looked at the water. Jenny tucked the strand behind her own ear. She picked up her fork. She did not say a single word for 4 minutes, and neither did he. And the silence between them was the loudest thing on the terrace. The Arteta dinner that evening was long and well lit, and full of people performing slightly. Jenny did not perform. She simply was, sharp and warm and completely in command of every corner of the conversation, the kind of woman who walks into a room and makes the room shift without appearing to try. By the third course, Arteta himself was directing his most important questions to her specifically. Roland sat across the table and watched her. He didn't pretend otherwise. He watched her. The way you watch something that belongs to you move through a room, with the focused patience of a man who has waited a long time to see this again, and is not going to waste it by looking somewhere else. Jenny felt it on the back of her neck for 3 hours. She didn't look at him once. The Arteta team left at 10. Cars outside, handshakes flying around. Jenny and Roland stayed. There were contract details that needed finalizing, language that needed agreeing on before tomorrow's closing meeting, legitimate professional reasons to remain at the table after everyone else had gone. They moved to the balcony because the room inside felt too closed, and the night was warm, and the sea below was loud and unhurried, and the contract papers spread across the balcony table gave them both something to look at that wasn't each other, and for a while. Roland put his pen down. "Did you know I would be here?" Jenny said. She didn't look up from the document. "Before Valencia. Did you already know?" The sea moved below them. "I knew I wasn't done with you," he said. "I've never been done with you." Her pen pressed into the paper. The balcony was very quiet. She thought about Bruno asking if she had been to the beach, about the word overreact delivered gently like a known fact, about the version of herself that fit neatly inside Bruno's life, and the version sitting on this balcony at 10 o'clock at night with contract papers she wasn't reading, and a man she had packed a bag to escape, telling her he had never been done with her. "What did he give you?" Roland said quietly. "That I didn't." Her pen stopped moving. "Don't," she said. "Peace," he said. "Not cruelly, just certain. He gave you peace, and you chose it because I made you feel like you were drowning." "You weren't drowning," he said. "You were alive. There's a difference. You just didn't know how to live with it." The sea, the warm night, and the memory arrived the way it always arrived, without permission, at the exact moment she was least defended against it. 2 years into their relationship. She had been at the desk for hours, and the apartment was dark except for her screen. She heard him come in. His hand came over her shoulder and closed her laptop. "You're done for tonight," he said. Not a question, not a negotiation, just certainty. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She let him take her hand, and she followed him, and felt it then, the specific terror of a woman who has just understood that this man can rearrange her entire world with one hand. The most terrifying part was that she wanted him to. She laid awake that night and thought, "If I stay 1 more year, I will not be able to leave." 3 months later, she waited until he was on a transatlantic flight. She packed 1 bag, left her key on the kitchen island, changed her number before he landed. She had called it survival. Sitting on this balcony 5 years later, she understood that survival and loss were not always different things. "Don't," she said. The last time, she could hear it in her own voice, the word arriving with no conviction left in it, thin and transparent, and fooling neither of them. Roland didn't move toward her. He didn't need to. But he looked at her the way he had always looked at her, like nothing else in the room existed. Like the ring on her finger meant nothing. Like 5 years was simply the space between then and now. The silence between them filled with everything they had never finished saying. She closed the last 2 inches. Or he did. The narrative will never settle this. Both are true. Neither of them will ever say otherwise. Their mouths crashed together. The specific warmth of it. The way her hands found the lapels of his jacket before her mind caught up with what her hands were doing. 5 years, and her body remembered everything. The exact pressure, the exact angle, the way he kissed her, like he had decided to take his time and meant it. He pulled back just enough to speak, his breath against her mouth, his hands at her face. 5 years, he said, his voice low and rough at the edges in a way that cost him something to let her hear. 5 years, Jenny, and you still feel exactly like coming home. Just like I remember. Her fingers tightened on his jacket, his jaw tightened against her cheek, his mouth at her jaw, her temple. The words arriving against her skin like something he had been holding for a long time and had finally stopped seeing any reason to keep. You ran from me once, he said. I let you go. I won't make that mistake again. His hands moved from her face to her waist, and he lifted her. Just enough. Just the way he always did. The specific way that her body remembered before her mind caught up. And she made a sound against his mouth, and he said, Come here. Low against her jaw, and walked her backward through the balcony door into the room. The sea through the open window, the contract papers outside on the table in the warm night air, his hands finding the zipper at the back of her dress, with the ease of a man who had done this before and had thought about doing it again. Her fingers at his shirt buttons. The silence of the room where two people are finally finishing something that should have been finished a long time ago. Afterward, in the dark room. She lay against his chest, breathing him in, the warmth of his skin, the weight of his arm around her, all of it so familiar, it hurt. He had taken his time. Her body had remembered everything. Every part of her she had packed into one bag and walked out of his life. She had given back tonight without a single word of resistance. She laid with her eyes open in the dark, and his heartbeat steady under her palm, and her ring somewhere on the nightstand, and Bruno's name sitting in her chest like something she had put down and was not ready to pick back up. Roland's lips pressed into her hair. I missed this, he said. Into the dark. I missed you. Every day, Jenny. Every single one. His hand moved slowly across her back, down her spine, back up. The specific way he had always touched her, when the rest of the world had gone quiet, and it was just the two of them. You're mine, he said. So quiet it was almost nothing. She closed her eyes. She didn't answer. She pressed her hand flat against his chest. His heartbeat was steady under her palm. They lay like that in the dark the way they used to, tangled, quiet, completely still. At some point his breathing slowed. His arms stayed around her even in sleep. She laid awake for a long time listening to the sea. She moved slowly when she finally did. Carefully. The way you move when you are trying not to wake someone. Roland's eyes opened. He had not been asleep. He looked at her dress in her hands, her shoes on the floor, the ring back on her finger, and said nothing for a moment. Just looked at her with those steady, consuming dark eyes. You're doing it again, he said quietly. Her hand stilled on the fabric of her dress. Roland! You're leaving, he said. In the dark, without saying it. I have to, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat up slowly and reached out and tucked the strand of hair behind her ear, the one that always came loose, the one he had been stopping himself from touching for 5 days, and let his hand rest against her cheek for just a second. You can run if you need to, he said. You enjoyed this as much as I did, but we both know where you'd end up. He dropped his hand. She stood with her shoes in her hand, and his words in the air, and the ring on her finger, and absolutely nowhere to put any of it. She left before sunrise. She let herself into her room. She sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at her ring for a long time, at the diamond, catching the gray morning light coming through the curtain, at the weight of it on her hand, that she had stopped noticing months ago, and was noticing now with a clarity that was not comfortable. Bruno's name was still in her chest. She didn't call him. She told herself it was because it was early. Marisol and Diane had flown back to New York on day 5, their vacation portion finished, their lives resuming. Jenny had hugged them goodbye in the hotel lobby and watched their car pull away and gone straight back upstairs to the contract documents. She had been alone in Valencia for the final 2 days. She understood now why that mattered. Day 7. The closing meeting was at 9. Arteta's lawyers presented the final documentation. Roland's team reviewed. Jenny's team countersigned. Hands across the table. The resort closed. Arteta toasted them as partners. Roland and Jenny lifted their glasses and smiled at exactly the right moments. They were very good at this now. They had been performing for a week, and the performance had become its own kind of easy. Afterward, the room cleared, and they were alone in it, for the last time. Roland looked at her across the table. "You're going to think about that for a long time," he said. Jenny picked up her folder. She hated him for reminding her again. "Last night," he said. His voice dropped just slightly, just enough. "Every single part of it. And you're going to think about it at the worst possible moments." Her jaw tightened. Her folder pressed against her ribs. "You're welcome," he said. She looked at him, at the complete unbothered ease of him, the slight curve at the corner of his mouth, the dark eyes that held hers without apology, the specific, insufferable calm of a man who had no guilt about any of it and wanted her to know it. She turned and walked toward the exit without a word. Behind her, she heard him move. One step, just one. And then nothing. She didn't turn around. She pushed through the door and walked into the Valencia morning, and kept walking, and did not let herself think about the almost sound of a step that stopped. She didn't look back. She should have looked back. His hand had moved, just slightly, just for a second, reaching toward the space she had just left before he caught himself. He looked down at his own hand like it belonged to someone else. Then he straightened his jacket and walked the other direction. Jenny spent the flight home staring at the clouds below the window, with her ring on her finger. The unreality of a woman traveling between two versions of her life. Bruno called when she landed. "Are you through arrivals yet? I'm in the car park, level 2. 5 minutes, she said. Her voice was perfect. She was suddenly very good at this. And he was leaning against the car when she came through the doors, keys in his hand, his face doing the thing it did when he saw her after time apart, that specific warm opening that she had always found steadying and was finding something different now. He crossed to her in 3 steps and pulled her in and held her the way he always held her. "There she is," he said into her hair. Jenny's arms went around him. Her eyes closed. His shirt smelled like their apartment and his cologne. His heartbeat under her cheek was steady and warm, and nothing like the dark room in Valencia and the sea through the open window and the voice that said, "Mine," so quietly. "I'm so proud of you," Bruno said. He pulled back and looked at her face with his hands on her shoulders. "You got the deal. You actually got it." "We got it?" she said. He laughed. "No, you got it. I know how you work." He picked up her bag, opened the car door, and they drove home happily. Their life resumed back to normal. She went back to work the following Monday. She took on 2 new projects. She attended the florist appointment on Wednesday and approved the centerpieces without argument, and let Bruno take her hand across the table and squeeze it, and squeezed back. She filled every hour with no time to think of Valencia. 3 weeks in, she was doing routine due diligence on the resort partnership documentation. Standard procedure, the kind of administrative work she usually delegated, but had kept for herself, because the resort file felt like something she needed to control personally when she found it, a filing date. Roland's firm had been in preliminary talks with the Valencia sellers 4 months before Jenny's firm knew the property existed. Not 3 weeks before. Not 1 month before. 4 months. She sat with that number for a long time without moving. She put the document down, then picked it up again. She thought about the partnership contract that had been fully drafted before she agreed to anything. She thought about Roland, not looking surprised when the clause dropped. Not shifting, just waiting for the rest of the room to catch up. The coffee that arrived already correct before he had ordered. Long enough delivered without blinking when she asked how long he had known. She thought about him finding her hotel. She thought about the way he had said, "I've never been done with you" on the balcony, like it was a statement of fact, rather than a confession. She put the document in a folder and did not open it again that day. His name arrived on her desk 2 days later on legitimate legal correspondence regarding the resort. A routine matter, entirely professional, completely above board. Jenny stared at the letterhead for longer than she should have and forwarded it to her assistant without responding. She saw him at an industry event the following week. He was across the room, already in conversation, and he found her within 30 seconds of her arriving, the way he always found her in any room, without appearing to look, without appearing to try. His eyes met hers once, on a look that said, "I know exactly where you are." And then he went back to his conversation, and Jenny went back to hers, and the evening continued. A second event. A third. New York was his city too, and she was beginning to feel that in her bones. The flowers arrived on a Tuesday morning. Her assistant brought them in with the rest of the morning deliveries and set them on the corner of her desk, and Jenny looked at them and went very still. Her favorite flowers. The exact variety, not the ones available in any New York florist, not the ones Bruno sent on her birthday. The specific bloom from a small market stall in a Valencia side street that she had visited once, alone, on day 2 before any of this had started. And she had bought one stem and carried it back to the hotel because it reminded her of something she couldn't name, and had left it on the windowsill and not thought about it again. No note. Just the flowers and the specific, cold knowledge of exactly how closely he had been watching her before she ever knew he was there. She left them on her desk all day. She didn't throw them away. One message came through the legal channel at 4 in the afternoon. "I'm not going to stop." Jenny read it once, read it again, read it 2 more times with her hand flat on the desk beside her keyboard and the flowers in the corner of her vision, and Bruno's contact in her phone that she had not opened yet today. She didn't reply. She didn't delete it. He wasn't chasing her. He was simply everywhere she looked. And the most unsettling part was that she had stopped being surprised by it. 6 weeks became 5. The wedding planning moved the way their life together moved, efficiently. Bruno's hand in hers at every appointment, steady and present the way he always was. She watched him sometimes across dinner tables, like she was trying to see something clearly, and kept failing to. She always looked away first. Roland's name kept appearing on her desk. Resort correspondence, routine and professional, arriving with the regularity of something that had decided to become part of her landscape. She forwarded everything to her assistant without reading it, and told herself this was professional boundaries. She was good at almost believing the delusion now. It was a Tuesday when she saw them. When she was walking to a client meeting when she passed a restaurant window, and her feet slowed before her brain did. Bruno was inside, corner table, easy posture, his jacket on the back of his chair the way he always put it. He was laughing, the full laugh, the relaxed one she had to work or beg for sometimes, and his hand was on the arm of the woman sitting across from him. Elena. Jenny knew her face from photographs. Bruno's ex. Ancient history, he had always said. Completely over. Elena said something, and Bruno laughed again and leaned forward, and his whole body had the easy looseness of a man who was exactly where he wanted to be. Jenny's feet stopped completely. Then she made them move. She kept walking, past the window, down the block, on into the client meeting, where she sat for 20 minutes and said all the right things and wrote nothing down because she couldn't make her pen move in a straight line. That night, Bruno was warm and present and made dinner and asked about her meeting and told her something funny that had happened at his office, and reached over in the middle of it all and cut something on her plate, without pausing his story, without asking. The small, automatic gesture of a man so comfortable in their life together that he had stopped noticing the edges of it. Jenny looked at her plate, then at him, already talking, already moving on to the next thing. She picked up her fork and said nothing. He never mentioned Elena. A week later, Priya mentioned it at their weekly girls' drinks. "How are you feeling about the Elena thing, by the way? Bruno told Henry months ago. I assumed you knew." And Jenny said, "Of course," and changed the subject, and spent the rest of the evening with a glass of wine she didn't finish, and a smile that didn't slip once. She brought it up that night. Calmly. At the kitchen counter while Bruno was making tea, she asked how long the lunches had been happening, and he told her. Months, he said. Since January, nothing physical, just lunch, just talking. They had unresolved things they needed to work through as friends. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. Bruno set the kettle down. He looked at her with the expression of a man who had thought about this conversation and had his answer prepared. "Because I knew how you'd react," he said. "I didn't want to deal with the overreaction when there was nothing to react to." The word landed the way it always landed. Gently. Overreact, she thought. Like it was a known quantity. Like her feelings were a weather pattern he had learned to work around. Jenny looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said. Bruno reached over and put his hand on hers. "It's nothing, Jen. I promise. I just didn't want the drama." She nodded. She let him keep her hand. She finished the evening the way she finished most evenings now, present on the surface, somewhere else underneath. And she lay awake that night long after Bruno slept and stared at the ceiling and thought about all the times she had made herself smaller to avoid being called too much and whether she had ever once been thanked for it. She didn't find an answer before she fell asleep. So they moved past it. Technically. The next professional exchange over the resort was a phone call, Roland's voice in her ear for the first time since Valencia, and her body registering it before her mind had a chance to prepare. She kept her voice level. Professional. She was good at this. Then, I'll need Bruno's confirmation on the timeline, Roland said, given that the asset affects your personal portfolio. Jenny's pen stopped moving. The room went very quiet. Bruno. He had said Bruno, casually, specifically, in a sentence structured to make sure she heard the name clearly and understood what it meant that he knew it. She had never told Roland his name. Not once. Not in Valencia. Not in any correspondence. Not in any context where Roland should have had access to it. Bruno was not connected to the acquisition. Bruno was not in any document Roland had ever touched. Her pen was still on the paper. Her weight had shifted back in her chair slightly without her telling it to. That won't be necessary, she said. Her voice was perfect. Roland said nothing else. He didn't need to. He simply let the silence sit there between them on the phone line and let her understand. Fully. Completely. Without any room for alternate explanation. Exactly how long he had been watching her life from a distance, and exactly how much of it he had always known. The call ended. Jenny put the phone down on her desk and looked at it for a long time. The note arrived the next morning. Handwritten. Her name on the envelope in the specific handwriting she had not seen in 5 years and had not forgotten for a single day of them. She opened it at her desk with her coffee going cold beside her. One line. Have dinner with me, 1 hour. Hear me out. She read it twice, folded it, dropped it in the bin beside her desk. 12 minutes later, she reached into the bin and took the note back out. She smoothed it flat on her desk. She had the document in her bag. She had rehearsed the conversation 3 times on the subway ride over. The opening line, the evidence, the speech she had been composing in pieces for 3 weeks every time she forwarded his correspondence to her assistant, without reading it. And every time she walked past the flowers, she still had not thrown away. She knew exactly what she was going to say. She knew exactly how she was going to say it. She knew exactly how she was going to leave. She was ready. Ready for the closure. So the restaurant was quiet and private. Roland was already at the table when she arrived. He stood when he saw her cross the room and pulled out her chair, and she sat down without acknowledging the gesture, because acknowledging it would require looking at him, and she was not ready to do that yet. She opened her bag and took out the document and put it on the table between them. 4 months, she said. Your firm was in preliminary talks with the Valencia sellers 4 months before my firm knew the property existed. Not weeks. 4 months. She pressed 2 fingers flat on the document. You built the whole thing. The deal, the clause, the partnership, all of it. You built it around me. Roland looked at the document. His eyes moved across it once, not reading it, just registering it, and then came back to her face. I didn't set you up, Jenny, he said. I made sure that when you finally stopped running, you ran directly into me. He held her gaze without moving. You owe me 5 years. Did you really think I'd let a legal document be the reason I didn't get them back? The restaurant was very quiet around them. Jenny looked at him across the table and felt the specific, contained fury of a woman who had prepared for a denial and had not prepared, for a man who looked her in the eye and confirmed everything without apology and waited for her to decide what to do with it. She picked up the document, put it back in her bag. She had prepared a speech, and she delivered it. Every word of it. Valencia was a mistake that should not have happened and would not happen again. She loved Bruno. She was getting married in 2 weeks. Well, Roland needed to stop. The correspondence, the events, the flowers, all of it. She said it clearly and evenly, and without her voice doing anything she had not given it permission to do. Roland listened to all of it without moving, without interrupting, without the expression on his face doing anything except staying completely, infuriatingly still. When she finished, he looked at her for a moment. He makes you smaller, he said. You don't even notice anymore. But I've been watching you for years, Jenny, and I watched it happen slowly, and I watched you let it happen, and I watched you call it peace. Go to hell, she said. You're my hell, he smirked. Her hand moved to her bag strap. Her weight shifted forward. She was leaving. She had said what she came to say, and she was leaving, and this was over. But she put the bag down. She picked up her wine glass instead. Roland watched her do it and said nothing. 2 hours. She argued and he absorbed it. She pushed and he didn't move. She told him he had no right. To Valencia, to the flowers, to engineering an entire acquisition around a woman who had made her decision 5 years ago. And he listened to all of it with the patience of a man who had been waiting for exactly this conversation and was not going to waste it by getting defensive. At some point, the argument stopped being about the acquisition. "You left without a word," he said, not accusing, just stating. "Not a conversation, not a letter. You waited until I was on a plane and you packed a bag and you changed your number." "I know what I did," she said. "I came home to a key on a kitchen island," he said. "Mom, I called your number for 3 days before I accepted that it wasn't going to connect." 3 days, Jenny. Her wine glass was in both hands. She didn't say anything. "I knew about Bruno," he said. "Before you were 6 months in. I knew his name, his firm, where he took you for dinner on your birthday that first year." His jaw was tight. "I told myself I was letting you go. I was never letting you go. I just hadn't found the right moment yet." The restaurant, the low light, the sound of other people's quiet conversations moving around them like water around 2 fixed points. "That is not something a stable person says," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's not." He said it without embarrassment and without apology, and without any apparent interest in softening it. And somehow, that was the most disarming thing he had said all evening, because it was simply true. And he knew it, and he was not going to dress it up for her comfort. She looked at him across the table, at the steadiness of him, the specific quality of his attention that had always made her feel like the only thing in any room. The man who had closed her laptop and said, "You're done for tonight," with a certainty that had terrified her, and that she had spent 5 years missing in a place she never talked about, and felt something shift in her chest that she did not have a clean name for. She went home at 10:30. She told Bruno she had been working late. He was on the sofa with his laptop, and he looked up and smiled, and said, "There she is," and patted the cushion beside him, and she sat down and let him pull her into his side, and stared at the television without seeing it. She did not sleep well. The next morning, Bruno mentioned the venue florist needed a final confirmation on the ribbon color, and Jenny said, "Fine, whatever you think." And Bruno said, "That's my girl," and kissed the top of her head and went back to his coffee. Jenny put her cup down on the counter. "Don't call me that," she said. Bruno looked up. "What?" "That's my girl." She kept her voice even. "Don't call me that." He looked at her with the expression he wore when she did something he had filed under a category he had already named. "It's just a saying, Jen. I know what it is. You're being—" "Don't," she said. Quietly, finally. "Don't finish that sentence." Bruno closed his mouth. He looked at her for a moment with something careful moving behind his eyes, and then he nodded slowly and picked up his coffee and said, "Okay," in the tone of a man choosing not to escalate. And Jenny stood at the kitchen counter and felt the specific exhaustion of a woman who had been translating herself into a language someone else could hear for so long. She had forgotten what her own voice sounded like at full volume. They moved through the rest of the morning without speaking much. Bruno was bewildered in the specific way of a man who genuinely did not understand what had just happened and genuinely wanted to. The rehearsal dinner was at a restaurant in the West Village that Bruno had chosen because Jenny had mentioned once, 18 months ago, that she liked the lighting there. She had forgotten she said it. He hadn't. She sat beside him for 3 hours, with his hand finding hers at every right moment, during the toast, during the laughter, during the moment his mother reached across the table and squeezed Jenny's arm and said, "We are so happy you're joining our family," with eyes that meant every word. And Jenny smiled and squeezed back. She laughed at the right moments. She said the right things. She held Bruno's hand and felt him hold hers back. The apartment was quiet when they got home. Bruno was tired in the warm, content way of a man whose evening had gone exactly as he hoped. He brushed his teeth and kissed her forehead and said, "1 week," with a smile that held nothing complicated in it, and was asleep within 20 minutes. And Jenny lay beside him in the dark and looked at the ceiling. 1 week. She got up at 2, poured a glass of water in the kitchen, and stood at the counter and didn't drink it. The city was quiet outside the window. The apartment was quiet around her. Bruno's breathing from the bedroom was steady and even and completely unaware. Her phone lit up on the counter. a number she had never saved. She knew it before the screen finished brightening. "I know what you're doing right now." She stared at it. Her thumbs moved. "You don't know anything about me." 3 seconds. "You're sitting somewhere quiet, convincing yourself you're fine." She put the phone face down on the counter, picked it up and stood with it in her hand, and looked at the dark hallway that led to the bedroom where Bruno was sleeping, and thought about 1 week and the dress in her mother's spare room, and the way Bruno had said, "That's my girl," and the way Roland had said mine in the dark, in Valencia, with his mouth against her hair. She put the phone on the counter. She got dressed in the dark. Slowly, carefully, the way you move when you are making a decision you have already made, and are simply letting your body catch up to it. She picked up her bag. She stood in the bedroom doorway for a moment, and looked at Bruno asleep in the bed, his face completely relaxed, completely trusting, completely unaware, and felt the full weight of what she was about to do settle across her shoulders. She felt it. She went anyway. The cab took 14 minutes. She spent them with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the city moving past the window, and no version of this that she could construct felt clean or simple or okay. She was not confused. She was not drunk. She was not acting on impulse. She was a woman making a clear-eyed choice with full information, and that was the most honest and the most difficult thing about it. Roland buzzed her up without asking who it was. He opened the door before she knocked. He was awake. She had known he would be awake. He had always been awake when she needed him to be. That had always been one of the things about Roland, that she had never been able to explain to anyone. And he looked at her, standing in his doorway in the dark with her bag over her shoulder, and said nothing. Just looked at her for 1 moment, and then stepped back and let her in. When she came in, she stood in the middle of the room, and he stood a few feet away, and neither of them moved. "I don't know how to stop," she said. Her voice was steady. "I have been trying for years, and I don't know how to stop." Roland looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the room. He didn't rush. He raised both hands and cupped her face the way he used to, the specific, complete way that had always made her feel like the only thing he was ever going to look at, and tilted her face up and looked at her for 1 more second, like he was making sure she was real. "Then stop trying," he said. His mouth came down on hers quickly, and her hands went to his chest. And 5 weeks of New York, 2 weeks of rehearsed distance, and 5 years of a door she had been holding shut, dissolved into nothing in the specific, a devastating way of things that were never going to hold. It was not gentle. It was the kiss of 2 people who had been keeping their distance for 5 years, and had finally run out of reasons to. His hand slid from her face to her jaw, to her neck, and she felt his fingers in her hair, and she made a sound against his mouth that she hadn't planned, and he responded to it by pulling her closer, 1 hand at the back of her neck, and 1 hand finding her waist and drawing her in with the unhurried certainty of a man who had decided this was where she belonged and was done arguing about it. She kissed him back with everything she had been holding back for 5 weeks, and the bag slipped off her shoulder, and neither of them noticed. He walked her backward without breaking the kiss, his hands sure and steady, her hands at his collar, and the city light moving across them as they crossed the room. And when her back met the wall, he pulled back just enough to look at her face in the dark, and his jaw was tight, and his eyes were on hers, and he looked like a man holding himself still by a thread. "Tell me to stop," he said against her jaw. "If you want me to stop." Her hands tightened in his shirt. She didn't tell him to stop. He lifted her, hands at her waist, the specific, easy lift of a man who knew her weight and had never forgotten it. And she wrapped her arms around his neck, and he carried her through the apartment with his mouth at her throat. What followed was not an accident. It was not confusion. It was not a moment of weakness that could be explained away by wine or proximity. Well, it was a woman making a choice with her eyes completely open, choosing the fire she had spent years running from, choosing the man who had engineered an entire acquisition to get her in a room she couldn't walk out of, choosing the thing that was wrong by every external measure, and the only thing that had ever felt completely right. Afterward, she lay against his chest, and his hand moved across her back. She closed her eyes. At some point, she moved. Carefully. His arm tightened once in his sleep, or what she thought was sleep, and then released, and she sat up slowly, and found her clothes in the dark, and got dressed in the specific quiet of a woman who had done this before and knew how it went. She was reaching for her bag when she heard him. "You're leaving again, Jenny." She stopped with her bag in her hand. It's almost 4, she said. "I know what time it is." She stood still and looked at him sitting up against the headboard, looking back at her with those steady dark eyes that had never needed light to see her. "I have to go back," she said. "I know," he said. "Go. Run like you always do." Roland. "Go home, Jenny," he said quietly. "Do what you need to do. I'll be here." She put her bag over her shoulder and walked out. She let herself into the apartment and moved through the dark to the bathroom and turned the shower on and stood under it for a long time. She came out and found her phone on the counter where she had dropped it. Bruno's phone was now on the counter too. The screen had lit up with a notification, and she saw it before she could look away. A message preview. Elena's name at the top. "I miss you, baby." Jenny stood in the bathroom mirror, thinking about those 4 words on Bruno's screen. Then she put her phone in her pocket and went to get dressed for the rehearsal dinner. 3 hours later, she sat across from Bruno at the rehearsal dinner and smiled when he smiled and gave him her hand when he reached for it. The table was full of people who loved them both. She had never felt more alone in a room in her life. Roland was in his apartment, not texting, not planning, not running the next calculation and sequence of them, just sitting in the specific quiet of a man who had finally placed every piece on the board and had nothing left to do but wait for the one person who had always had the power to end the game to decide that she was ready. He had done everything he could up to this point. The rest belonged to her. The hotel suite was full of women who loved her. Marisol had brought champagne, and Diane had brought the kind of energy that made small rooms feel like celebrations, and Jenny's mother was there with her reading glasses pushed up on her head, and happy tears. She kept blinking back every time she looked at her daughter, and the bridesmaids were laughing about something near the window, and the whole suite was warm and loud and full of the specific joy of people who wanted this day to be everything. Jenny stood at the mirror in her dress. She looked at her hands first, at the ring on her left hand that caught the suite lighting the way it had been catching light for 6 weeks, at the dress her mother had zipped up 40 minutes ago with shaking happy hands, at the woman looking back at her, who was wearing all the right things and standing in all the right places, and had not felt like herself in longer than she could honestly account for. She looked at her own face, quiet inside all the noise, clear in a way she hadn't expected and couldn't look away from. She thought about the girl who had packed one bag in the dark while the man she loved was on a plane. She had thought she was saving herself. She had thought peace was what happened after you survived something. She had thought if she could just get far enough away from the consuming, terrifying, specific feeling of being completely known by another person, she could build something calmer and call it happiness. She had spent 5 years building a life on that assumption. When she looked at herself in the mirror in her wedding dress and understood, quietly and completely, that she had been wrong. Jenny, her mother's hand on her shoulder. "It's time." Jenny looked at her mother's face in the mirror, at the happiness in it, at the uncomplicated, complete love of a woman who wanted nothing for her daughter except good things. She covered her mother's hand with hers. "I know," she said. The processional music reached them from downstairs. Jenny picked up her bouquet. She walked out of the suite and down the corridor and through the doors that opened onto the aisle, and the room full of faces turning toward her, and the flowers, and the light coming through the tall windows, and Bruno at the altar at the far end of it all. He straightened when he saw her come through the doors, just slightly, his shoulders pulling back, his chin lifting, the involuntary posture of a man seeing something that made him stand up straighter without thinking about it. His eyes went full and bright, and his whole face did the thing it did when he looked at her after time apart. He was so genuinely happy to see her walking toward him that something moved through Jenny's chest that was not simple, and was not clean, and was not something she had a good name for. She walked the full length of the aisle. She took her place in front of him. Bruno looked at her like she was the best thing that had ever walked through any door he had ever stood near, and Jenny looked back at him and saw him clearly. The warmth and the steadiness and the genuine, uncomplicated love of a man who had shown up every single day. She saw the life he had built around the version of her that fit inside it. She saw the beach he had always asked if she'd visited. She saw the laptop he had never once closed because he had never quite understood that closing it was something she needed. She saw the word overreact delivered gently like a known fact about weather. She saw all of it clearly and without anger and without blame because Bruno had loved her as fully as he knew how to love her, and that had simply, quietly, never been enough. The efficient began. Jenny listened to the words moving through the room. Around her, the faces of everyone who loved them. Bruno's mother, who had squeezed her arm at the rehearsal dinner. Marisol near the front with her eyes already wet. Her own mother in the second row, with her reading glasses pushed up on her head. She looked at Bruno. He was looking back at her with everything he had. Her bouquet was still in her hands. The ring was on her finger. The music had stopped, and the room was very quiet, and the officiant's voice was moving toward the moment that everyone in the room had come here for. Jenny went still. Not dramatically. Not with tears or a sharp breath or any of the external signals of a woman falling apart. Just a specific internal stillness. The stillness of a woman who has finally run out of road and is standing at the edge of it, looking clearly at what is in front of her and what is behind her, and understanding that there is only one honest thing left to do. She looked at Bruno. "I can't," she said. Quietly. Not to the room. To him. Only to him. "I'm sorry, I can't." His face. And she had known it would be his face that stayed with her, and she had been right. The specific sequence of it. The confusion first, then the understanding moving in underneath it like water rising, then something that was not anger and not hatred, but simply the open, undefended pain of a man who had loved someone completely and was only now understanding what that had cost him. She would carry his face for a long time. She handed her bouquet to the bridesmaid nearest her. She turned. She walked back down the aisle through the silence of a room that had not yet found its voice and pushed through the church doors, and the afternoon light hit her, and the city was exactly the way the city always was, loud and indifferent, and completely unbothered by what had just happened inside that building. She stopped at the top of the steps. The Roland's car was at the curb. Black Rolls-Royce, engine running. Roland stood beside it with his jacket on and his hands in his pockets, and his eyes already on her, like he had been watching the doors since before they opened, like he had never looked anywhere else. He hadn't called. He hadn't texted. He had simply known. The way he had always known. The way he had known she would come to Valencia. The way he had known she would come to his apartment in the dark, the night before her rehearsal dinner. The way he had known from the moment she placed a $5 bill against his chest at a beach club and walked away without looking back. He knew she was never going to stay in that church, that she was always going to end up exactly here. She understood now that he had never doubted it, not once, not for a single day of 5 years. He looked at her from the bottom of the steps, the way he had always looked at her, like she was the only fixed point in any space he had ever occupied, like the 5 years and the key on the kitchen island, and the changed number, and Bruno, and the dress, and the church full of people. And all of it was simply the long way around to this specific afternoon, on these specific steps. He didn't open his arms, didn't smile, didn't say a single word that meant "I told you so," because he was not that kind of man, and she was not the kind of woman who would walk toward that. He just waited. She looked at him for one long moment, at the top of the steps in her dress, with the afternoon light on her face, and the city carrying on behind him, and 5 years of everything they had been to each other, and everything they had cost each other, sitting in the air between them. Then she walked down the steps. She got in the car. The door closed. The city moved past the windows the way it always moved, continuous, indifferent, completely unbothered by the fact that something had just shifted permanently inside it. Jenny sat with her hands in her lap and her dress around her, and did not look back at the church. She looked forward. Roland's hand found hers on the seat between them. He lifted it slowly, pressed his mouth to her knuckles once. Not triumphant, not "I told you so," just quiet and certain and careful. The gesture of a man who had waited years for something and was now holding it like he understood exactly what it was worth. He kept her hand. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. The car moved into traffic, and the church got smaller behind them, and the afternoon went on exactly the way afternoons do when the world has no idea what just changed inside it. The city loud and alive, and completely unbothered, and the two of them sitting in silence with their hands together, and 5 years of distance finally, completely gone. Suddenly the car stopped. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Roland turned and looked at her, and she looked back, and there was nothing left to perform, nothing left to manage, nothing left to pretend. Just the two of them in the car with little space between their faces. She closed the distance first. His hands came up to her face, and her fingers found his collar, and she kissed him. It was not soft, and it was not careful, and it was not the kind of thing that left any room for second thoughts. It was 5 years, and a beach club, and a balcony, and a church, and a woman in a wedding dress finally done running, all of it landing at once. She chose the storm, not because it was safe, because she was finally done pretending she wanted anything else but the storm. Drop a comment below. Did Jenny make the right choice? Team Roland or Team Bruno? Do you actually think Bruno was a good man? Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more dark romance stories.